Hi, it's me, your local Kalista abuser, and since the item changes have been out for a while now and Kalista win rate skyrocketed, I decided to talk about all the items for her, not only because new players picked her up, but also no one seems to understand what to buy on her, so I'll clear that up from my perspective. Let's start off with the best mythic on her, since there are a lot of options. The main item most people should go for is Guinsoo. It's currently the strongest option because of how consistent it is. Very reliable because of the synergy with her E. Not to mention the armor pen from it, helps a lot with scaling, and allows you to skip one of these, for something more tanky. The only problem with it is force store and start, but on the other hand it helps you play more aggressive into harder matchups. Next item is Navori. So apparently some people can't do math and think this item is good on her, so let me explain it. Navori gives only 20% damage boost at full crit build. Meanwhile Guinsoo gives you additional attack every 3 hits. And what that means is Kalista E damage is basically increased by 33% from the moment you finish the item, not to mention it applies on hit effects of other items. So even if we consider crits on Kalista, Guinsoo still outperforms Navori. Other good mythics are yoummus and eclipse. I put them both together because they both play the same role for Kalista. Lethality items on Kalista basically allow you to speed up your snowball, and makes really hard matchups playable, and in late game you can still deal with most ADCs. You will need to adjust your playstyle to pull it off, but I'm gonna talk about it in my next guide. The main difference between Eclipse and yoummus is that you take Eclipse into tankier team comps, while yoummus into squishies, or when you have someone else on your team to deal with the tanks. But even after nerfs, yoummus is better option since it gives you better early and mid game, and has much better passive compared to Eclipse. The only downside to those items is it turns Kalista into even more feast or famine champion. You either go 20-0 or 0-20, and if the game goes on for too long it's much harder to 1v9 with it, making it less consistent build. Last mythic I want to talk about is Infinity Edge. Okay, so my advice is to completely ignore it. Don't touch it, move ahead and don't look behind. Even after Kalista buffs it's just not worth it. If you want to go crit you can go lethality items instead, since they give you more stats than just crit and AD. It's really strong, trust me. Not to mention Randuin is one of the best armor items in the game, and it would counter you even harder now. On top of that you are forced to buy one of these, not leaving much place for survivability. When it comes to other mythics, they are simply useless. But since some people still don't understand why Sheen items are garbage on her, let me explain. First you can throw Divine Sunderer out of the window, it's even worse than Triforce. Meanwhile the problem with Triforce, apart from inconsistent proc, is base AD increase. Kalista AD is way below average, so the 20% increase isn't as big as some people believe. Now that you know what mythics have my stamp of approval, let's move on to legendary items. First one in the line is good old Shieldbow. After the changes, it's basically a much weaker version, because the shield doesn't start scaling until level 11. The attack speed it gives is pretty much useless in the early game. You either win the lane and you won't need the shield, or you fall behind and 215 HP won't save you. Next on the list is Bork, one of the best items on her of all time. Good stats, insane passive, and even better build path. You want to buy its second item in most games, because it helps a lot with kiting away from enemies and killing tanks. Basically a no-brainer buy, I don't think I need to explain it more. Next one is Hurricane, perfect item for team fights. Being able to eat everyone in fights can help you turn the game around, especially if enemy likes to stick together. It's really strong when you can't just focus on one target or if your team can already deal with tanks. Similar item that a lot of people will think of buying is Kraken. Generally speaking it's a good item, has a much better spike compared to Bork and Hurricane, and it also scales, making it much better option in games where enemies are mainly squishy, or if you have to buy way more damage than usual. Now for the item of many debates, Collector. After the buffs it's much stronger, but it's still a bit of a bait item. Generally speaking it's really good on Kalista when you go for one-shot build. The stats it gives are really good on her, because if you want to do this, you need to get both lethality and crit. Problem starts when you fall behind, then you want to maximize your damage with other items instead. Now let's talk about Prowler. The odds are if you play lethality on Kalista, you bought it on more than one occasion. Well, let's just say it's even more of a bait item than Collector when it came out. You will only use its passive once, maybe twice during teamfight, and most of the time single crit would do much more damage than that. To finish off lethality items, Edge of Night. It's a reasonable item, since you don't buy anything else that can help you surviving. Health can help with high burst, and shield will be good if your positioning is bad, or if enemy has already hard time engaging on you. But if you feel like you don't need that safety net, you want to prioritize crit items instead. It's the best late game item for ADCs, but there's one thing you need to know before buying it. The passive AD it gives doesn't start scaling until level 13, so you don't want to buy it until that point, which is usually around 3rd or 4th item. Remember that as AD carry you have to focus on value of the items. For example, LDR for armor pen, hurricane for team fights, or edge of night for shitty positioning. Now for rapid fire cannon. It's an alright item if you are more into sending nukes. It lets you abuse attack with QE from a safe distance, giving you a really good poke, and helps executing enemies that are just slightly out of your normal range. Best option is to buy it as last item because most of the time you are relatively safe until then. To finish off the attack speed items, Wits End.
Here's the million-dollar question.
Long story short, it's a bait item. Long story long, most of the time you don't want to buy more than 2 attack speed items on her. Other items have much higher DPS, and there is just no place for this item in any build, unless enemy has full AP team. But even then, if you want to get MR, there are way better options. Now for the last actual ADC items, QSS. There is not much to say except Silvermere Dawn is a better version of Mercurial Scimitar. Tenacity and slow resists are much better for Kalista than movement speed, and you get much better stats for that. And since I've already mentioned Lords Dominic and Mortal Reminder, I'm gonna move to underrated items. First one on the list is Black Cleaver. Not only is it the most gold-efficient item in the entire game, but it also stacks a bit faster with Guinsoo. It's even better than those two, since it gives you tons of health, and it reduces enemy armor for your team. And since most people don't care about the draft, it helps if your team is mostly AD. Another great defensive item is Anathema. It makes you insanely tanky, and helps pinning down the carries. Not to mention it helps surviving engage from assassins. It's also the best option when enemy has only one main carry that can actually be a threat, or 4-to-1 damage ratio in team comps. But if enemy has a lot of magic damage and their AD is useless, you should consider Force of Nature instead, to get more value from resists. It used to be the best item for MR, and even after nerfs it's pretty strong. Another great option is Abyssal Mask, but you should buy it only if your team has a lot of AP damage. You basically get to be in fight for longer while buffing your team, so the damage adds up quickly. And since I totally didn't forget Ma and am totally not recording it last minute, you basically buy it if you need magic res, while also being behind. Just like Shieldbow, it gives you some survivability and allows you to deal more damage, so you can keep up with the game tempo. Now for items versus high AD team comps. The best armor options are still Randuin's and Frozen Heart, depending on what you need more. When it comes to Death's Dance and Guardian Angel, they aren't that good. First one is terrible for ranged champs, and second one isn't that good in solo queue. The biggest problem is that both items do almost nothing, because you are just too squishy. You get caught and die? Odds are enemy will secure the kill when you revive. Enemy has high damage burst? 10% from Death's Dance probably won't stall the damage enough, and you won't have enough time to kill anyone. The only time you buy either is if you know enemy can't get to you easily and boots don't change the outcome of a fight. Now for the most underrated item of them all, Gargoyle. One of the strongest items in the entire game that no one buys. It's perfect in lower ELO where people have no clue how to play, and you can just space glide on them without being worried about dying. It perfectly synergizes with all the HP items I mentioned before, and if you take conditioning, you basically become ranged Trinda on crack. Okay, I guess that's it for today. Now you can go and have fun on the Rift. And congrats to you for watching till the end. You are totally not masochist.